All right, so we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Allison and Adam Steinmetz, in memory of Adam's grandfather, Rabbi Sheldon Steinmetz, Harav Shlomo Tzvi Ruvain ben Shimon Zichron Lebracha, Semi and Malka Estes, in the memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, and in memory of Staff Sergeant Naftali Yona Gordon Hashem Yikom Damo, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's sister Leah Bas Shmuel, and Zachrini Shulam Bas Shmuel, Esther Bas Zachariah, whose yard sites are all during the month of Kislev. Our week of learning sponsors Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, in honor of the Chasana, Baruch Hashem, that occurred beautifully b'Shat Tov Mitzlachas last night to their daughter Sophie Tizevi Granat, made a zocha to build a bayis ne'eman b'Yisrael. And our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, and the schus of continued health for Shulam Ischana Bas Susha, and by Sima Haken and daughters Orly and Yael, as a schus for Refuah Shlema for Saeed Yosef HaKohen Ben Tashi, who is having surgery today. We hope that Emir Hashem Saeed will have a Refuah Shlema together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, all the Neshama Shav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those. Emir Hashem, who need Besoros Tovos and Bracha should be Zocha to acquire from HaKadosh Baruch Hu today and in the days to come. And also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, a really incredible daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Ayin Gimel 73. We are picking up on Ayin Gimel Odalef. So we left off again. Remember, we're trying to answer one simple question in the Mishnah, which is, why isn't the animal that is mixed in with the other permitted animals batal? Right? That's the simple case of the Mishnah, where halacha l'maaseh going to have a prohibited animal that is mixed in with a number of permitted animals. So now the shaila is, why don't we say simple bittul? Remember again, midaraisa chad bitrei batal. All right, anything that is prohibited is permitted in a mixture of 2 to 1. So why not just say bittul right off the bat? So we gave a couple of different answers. The last answer the Gemara gave, it's very simple. It's what's called a davar sheba minyan. And I both say, now remember, what does davar sheba minyan mean? As opposed to getting into kol shadarko limnos, es shadarko limnos, which is one of those machloks on both sides that make sure you commit to memory, because we're going to see that throughout all of Shas. We have seen it throughout all of Shas. Leaving that aside, there's a simpler idea of davar sheba minyan. Davar sheba minyan means anything that is sometimes looked at as an individual unit is not batal. That's it. Not all the time, not most of the time. That's some of the time, as long as you have an item that sometimes is sold or looking or reckoned as an individual unit, halacha l'maaseh is not batal. Certainly animals fit that bill, right? An animal sometimes is sold as part of a chevra, but also at other times is also sold, right, or used commercially as an individual unit. Therefore, again, it's not batal. So the Gemara says, Desanya, second line down from the top, Ayin Gimel Dav, Desanya, litra ketzios, this is a very interesting case. Litra ketzios, shadar sal pi eagle. Okay, so here's the case. So first of all, litra ketzios, litra is a measure. Ketzios, it's actually interesting. Rashi points out the actual etymological root of this word is ketzios is from lashon of mikzoa, which was a tool. Now, what was it a tool used for? So apparently, if you had figs, what they used to do is like this. They used to make cakes of pressed figs. How do you make a cake of pressed figs? By the way, Thanksgiving is coming. This may come in handy for you, right? How do you make a cake of pressed figs? Right? So let me say again, you take your fig, then you have to take out the stem. The tool to take out the stem was called the mikzoa. Then it would be, you spread it out, you let it dry. Then what they would do is they would pack these together as cakes. They'd be packed, and then afterwards, what you would do is, if you would sell a piece of it, you would go and you would actually slice like a piece of the cake of, we see this all the time with Shas, a cake of pressed figs. So interestingly enough, so it's fascinating, I don't know why this is, but it's called the mikzoa, or litra ketzios, based on the lashon of the tool used to destem it. Okay. In any event, so what do you have over here? You have a litra shel ketzios. Now Rashi points out over here, if you look at Rashi's right across to the right. Litra ketzios, mishkal litra shel te'enim yeveshos, shel truma, shekitzam be'izemel, bekli sheshmo mikzoa. So we'll say, here's the case. I have a cake of pressed figs, that ultimately, again, is of truma. That's the important part to remember over here. This is no ordinary cake of pressed figs. It's truma. Now what happened? So the Gemara says, Shadar sa'al pi eagle, ve'eni yodeh be'ezel eagle darsa. This is very interesting. So what did you do? You went ahead and you essentially took this cake of pressed figs of truma, and you pressed it onto another cake of pressed figs in a kli. The pi eagle, Rashi says over here, is shem klihu. There was a utensil called an eagle. The Gemara says bedarsin baktios benidbakin zubazu benasin eagle kamogvina. So essentially, this eagle is the utensil in which you would make the cake of pressed figs. So in other words, a circular kli, you would press the figs in there, and again, it would become this cake of pressed figs. So if you can imagine, it's the following scenario. So imagine you have this kli, it's filled with figs. Now, what ends up happening is, if you can imagine, you have a ring of figs. We'll call that the litra shel katzios. That ring of figs, ultimately, again, is truma. What did you do? You took that ring and you pressed it into the eagle. So now you mixed the ring of figs of truma, and you put it, you pressed it into the top of one of the eagle utensils. What's the issue? You don't know which eagle utensil you pressed it into. So again, just to give you the imagery, right? You have a bunch of these eagle utensils, right? A bunch of these pressed fig molds, molds. And again, you have a ring of truma figs. You pressed the truma figs into the mouth of one of those molds. You do not know which one. Okay, so that's the case over here. So litra shel katzios shadar sa'al pi eagle. So you took a ring of truma pressed figs. You pressed it into the mouth of one of the molds. Ve'inu yodeh be'ezel eagle darsa. And you don't know which mold you put it into. Now, both say, or similar idea. Let's say instead of using a mold, you were using a barrel. Same idea. So you took the ring of truma figs, you pressed it into the mouth of one of the barrels, but you do not know which barrel you placed it into. Kaveres, by the way, normally means like a beehive, but in this case it means a mold or basket shaped like a hive. It's all the same idea. You have this ring of pressed figs of truma, you pressed it into the mouth of one of these utensils, and you don't know which utensil you put it into. So we'll say, now, the shaila is, so now what do I do? Now, what's the good news in this? The good news in this is the truma mixed in to the rest of the mold? Is it mixed in? Not really, not like in a classic sense. Why? Because remember, again, it's sitting on top. So the good part is, I kind of know where it is, but I don't know where it is. In other words, I know that it's sitting on the top of the mouth of one of these utensils, one of these molds. I just don't know which utensil it's in. So what's the halacha? So Rabbi Meir says, and this is Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Lazar Omer. So Rabbi Meir now quotes this machlokas. He says like this: Rabbi Lazar Omer, Roanes al Yonos kilohin prudos vatachtonos ma'alos al Yonos. So this is very interesting. Rabbi Meir essentially says we view the top layer. Now remember again. The way these cakes of pressed figs were often made was, essentially what you were doing was, you were stacking layer after layer of figs and then pressing them down. It's like you ever see like how they make shawarma? If you haven't, don't do it, right? It ruins the experience. But Lamaisa, it's not like they're getting like a piece of meat that size. But instead what they're doing is they're actually layering pieces of meat, right, one on top of the other on that spit. So it's a kind of a cake of pressed figs is made in a similar type of fashion as well. You're layering the figs. So because they're separate and distinct layers, Rabbi Lazar says something very interesting. He says essentially, we view the layer on top of each, we'll call it mold, of each utensil, as if it is separate, right, and then we view all of the lower layer figs as their own amount. If there's enough figs in the collective bottom layers, more than the figs on the top layer, then ultimately, again, the truma figs are batal and everything is mutter. Fascinating. So take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Rowan osakilohin prudos, Afapi she'ein kan kof pumin shal kof kelim shal heter levada iser levata iser batachtonos in bechlal safek lisarvim al yonos levatlon Rowan es kol litros hatachtonos val yonos shebechol kelim Prudos, Vizumu Reves Bekulan, Batachlonas Mitzarafos Halos. So we'll say this is an incredible chiddush. Now, by the way, the Gemara is operating under the idea over here that Truma is batal. Truma is going to be batal ultimately again in a ratio of 100 to 1. So interestingly enough, the Gemara says over here, even though the barrels or the utensils are separate and distinct, halachically we view them as a mixture. And we view essentially the top layer of figs of every barrel mixed in together with the bottom layers of all the barrels. So as long as there is enough of figs, collective figs in the bottom barrels, ultimately again to be mavatal, the upper layer, you're good to go. You're good to go. So if there's 100 times more figs in the collective bottom layers, now what's the tremendous chiddush of this? Tremendous chiddush is just separate barrels, right? They're totally separate barrels. But yet again, Rabbi Lozer essentially looks at this as, because the suffix devolves upon all of the barrels, therefore, I'm using barrels as the example, but whatever the particular utensil, therefore we're able to view them as a mixture. It's incredible. So Rabbi Yeshua says, Im yesh mea pumin yalu. Ve'imlav hapumin asurin vashulayim mutarin. So Rabbi Yeshua says like this. No, the only way it works is if there's 100 other barrels. If there's 100 mouths of utensils, then einachinami, the truma can be batal. In other words, as opposed to Rabbi Lozer, who calculates the 100 to 1 bittul ratio, utilizing the figs on the bottom of the barrels, Rabbi Yeshua says no. The 100 to 1 ratio has to be from the mouths of barrels. So in other words, if you have 101 barrels, and now in one of the barrels, a layer of truma figs got mixed in, then einachinami, we could view the truma as batal, because we look at the tops of the barrels, again, as all a mixture. But you can't combine the bottom layer of figs, ultimately, again, to be mavatal, the truma figs. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. Fine, that's Rabbi Yeshua. Good. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Now we'll say Rabbi Yehuda has a different. Now remember, this was Rabbi Meir's version of the machlokes, Rabbi Lozer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yehuda now has his own version. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Lozer Omer. Im yesh sham kuf pumin ya'alu ve'im lav hapumin asurin. So again, in Rabbi Yehuda's version, Rabbi Lozer says like this. Rabbi Lozer says no. If there are 100 other mouths of barrels, in other words, you need a 100 to 1 ratio to be mevatel truma. So if at the end of the day there's 100 other mouths of barrels, then einachinami, all the barrels will be mutter. But if not, ultimately again the barrels will be asur. Rabbi Yeshua says, this is really the important part for us today. Afidu yesh sham shlosh meos pumin lo yalu. Rabbi Yeshua says no. Even if there's 300 barrels, 300 mouths of barrels, the litra of truma is not going to be batal. Now, why not? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is in the second wide line. Listen to this. Why? Because Rabbi say why? So Yeshua will say like this. Yeshua will say because sometimes figs are sold as individual figs. So because of that, it's a davar sheba minyan, and a davar sheba minyan is never batal. Wow. So Rabbi Yeshua says, I don't care. You could have 500 barrels. It does not make a difference. Figs, again, remember, full circle. What are we doing here? This is not an existential question. I'm just asking in general, like, what are we doing here this morning? Right? So remember, again, we're answering one simple question, which is Mishnah. Why are you getting all worked up about a prohibited animal getting mixed into a group of permitted animals? Why don't we just say the prohibited animal is batal? To which, now we've been dealing with this, now the second day we're dealing with this question. Today's answer is, it's a davar sheba minyan. Davar sheba minyan means an item that is at any point in time looked at as an individual unit. And a davar sheba minyan is never batal. So Rabbi says, so now, who says that davar sheba minyan is never batal? Oh, Rabbi Yeshua. This is what we've been looking for this whole machlokes. So what does Rabbi Yeshua say? That if you have truma figs that got mixed in with other figs, I don't care if you have 500 other openings of barrels. 500. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Why? Because figs are a davar sheba minyan, sometimes looked at as an individual entity, and therefore halacha lemaisa never batal. Incredible. Good. So let's go. So what's this? Just want to point out this whole discussion. That's the line. That's the line we're looking for in all of this. Darsa be'igel ve'niyodeh be'ezamakom be'igel darsa. Now, interestingly enough, in all of these cases, remember, In all of these cases, what was unique about this is, what do I know? What do I know about the litra of truma figs? What do I know? What do I know? What do I know? I know that I put it in the mouth, right? I know that it's truma, right? I know that it's a fig, right? And I also know that I put it by the mouth of the barrel, right? That's what gives us a little bit of leverage in that case, right? I know the location, I just don't know which barrel it's in. Now the Bryce just transitions. Darsa beigel v'eino deve ezomakom beigel darsa. What happens if I mix it into the barrel? And what happened over here? I don't know where in the barrel I put it. Right? Olitzvona, olidroma. So I don't know. Did I put it in the north of the barrel? Did I put it in the south of the barrel? Divrei hakol ya'alu. Everyone agrees that it's batal. That is batal. The Rabbi said, now this is actually very interesting. If you look at Rashi, Rashi is 6 lines up from the bottom. Divrei hakol ya'alu. Hoil belese the isura be'ene shenidras v'nidbak ba'acheros milamala milamata u'minatzad in kan davar shvemiyin klal. So Rabbi said, this is just fascinating. So now the Gemara wants us to suggest like this. When do we say davar shvemiyin eino batal? When it's to a certain degree still quote unquote like discernible, recognizable. So like in this case, here's what I know. I know that there are truma figs sitting on the mouth of one of these utensils. That is an incontestable proof. Incontestable proof. But the Gemara says, when the figs, let's say, were mixed in. So let's say I mixed in the figs, then everyone agrees it's batal in 100-to-1 ratio. Why? Because since it's not recognizable and discernible, therefore the regular laws of bitul kick in. So this is actually very interesting. So apparently, and it seems to be a qualification, even if you hold davar shebeminyan is not batal, that's only if the mixture is in a way where there's some level of recognizability, right? Where there's some level, ultimately, again, of identifiability. But if it's a cohesive mixture, especially like this, we have like a min bimino, right? Where it's just a whole cholent of figs, right? So, which doesn't sound good, right? But you understand, right? It's a whole mixture of figs, right? So lemaisa, again, even if you hold davar shebeminyan ain't no batal, in that case you would say batal. Okay, that will say. So just to point out again, this whole discussion ultimately, again, it was for that statement of Rabbi Yoshua. So therefore, the Gemara is suggesting now that perhaps the reason why in our Mishnah, the prohibited animal is not batal in the mixture of the permitted animals is because it is a davar shebeminyan. Davar shebeminyan, it's reckoned individually, and therefore, Allah l'maisa lo batal. Good. So the Gemara goes back to Rashi. Rashi says, "Afilu tim rabbanan." And I will say, now remember again. I just also want to point out. Remember this whole discussion of davar shebeminyan. This whole discussion of Eshedar Kalimnos, Kol Shedar Kalimnos is very important, not just halachically, but is also incredibly important hashkafically as well. Now let's say, this idea of a davar shebeminyan lo batal is the source of the nitzchius, of the eternality of the Jewish people. You look at our story and it makes absolutely no sense. The story of our people, it makes no sense. How could it be that a nation that is so small in number, right, is so outsized in its influence, and that no matter what has been thrown our way, not only do we survive, but we thrive? How is it that we have not been swallowed up in the sands of time? How is it that we're not batal in a world that is so much greater than us? And what's the answer? Davar shebeminyan eino batal. As I will say, when you have something where every individual unit is of significance, it's never batal. What's the power of Klal Yisrael? The power of Klal Yisrael is, yes, we are an incredibly powerful holy nation that is made up of ridiculously amazing individuals. There is no such thing as a Yid, as a Jew who is not special. There is no such thing as a Jew who does not possess limitless koach. There is no such thing as a Jew who is not able to move heaven and earth. Each of us, because each of us is a davar shebeminyan. Davar shebeminyan. He'll say that's why, by the way, right? In other words, when we're counting for a minyan, we never go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that's a whole discussion in Gemara about davar, that bracha is only short on something that's something in an ayin. We don't count. Why? Because when you count someone, you limit them to a number, you're minimizing their influence. A Jew is the most powerful thing the world has ever seen. Each of us is a davar shebeminyan. because we are davar sheva minyan, there's a simple halacha. What's the halacha by davar sheva minyan? In a bottle. In a bottle. You want to know the nitzchias of Klal Yisrael, the eternality of the Jewish people? It's Zevachim Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, Zevachim 73a, called davar sheva minyan afilo b'derabanan lo batal v'choshkim b'daraisa. The world can't negate us. The world can't eradicate us. The world can't be mevatel us. Why? Because yes, we are powerful as a nation, but also because as individuals, each of us possesses an immeasurable holiness, an immeasurable importance, and therefore, no matter what, we are never batel. Incredible. Let's go back there. Rav Ashi says, Rashi says, our Mishnah could even reflect the view of the Rabbanan. I'll say, remember again. Remember the Rabbanan? Remember the Rabbanan? You're like, no. Right? Okay, so good. That's why I'm here, to manage the Rabbanan. Right? So the Rabbanan said in Maseches, I was like, come on, you got to get a little bit more excited about this stuff, right? This is gold. This is absolute gold. David, do we need like a stronger brew? Like what's going on over here? What are you serving? Like is this like Starbucks blonde? Like what is this? Come on. I'm 4 cups in already. I get started. This energy is not natural. This is like performance enhancing stuff over here. It's going, all right, so the Mesa. I start my coffee consumption at 5:10. 5:10. So this is the Mesa is very important. So remember, the Rabbanan in the Mishnah and Arla, were the ones who said that there are only normally 6 things that are not batel. Right? Remember again, we saw this in yesterday's daf. Rabbi Akiva added in the 7th. This was like the pomegranates, they goes a prach, the rimone badan. So this is very interesting. So now the issue with that is, according to the Rabbanan, right, if you hold that there are only 6 things that are not batel, according to Rabbi Akiva, the 7. Remember Rabbi Akiva added on kikara shal nachtum, kikar shal balabais, the loaves of just a regular balabas. So according to that, we're kind of back to our same question, which is, so why not say that the prohibited animal is batel? So Rav Ashi Amar afilu tim Rabbanan, listen to this, even according to the Rabbanan who say that really an animal should be batel in a greater mixture. That really should happen. But even the Rabbanan would agree that Allah Lamaisa, again, even in our Mishnah, the prohibited animal would not be batel. Why not? Listen to this. So he says, Bali chai kashivi v'lo batli. Ultimately, again, so this is very interesting. Even the Rabbanan say that Bali chayim, that animals are chashuv. So because animals are chashuv, therefore they are not batel. Shabbos says, so once again, what you see happening is something very interesting over here, that everybody seems to be coming around to this same idea, that although when you look at our Mishnah, it is tempting to apply the normative laws of nullification, it's not going to work for the simple idea that an animal is an important unit. Whatever halachic terminology you want to use, es shadarka limnos, kol shadarka limnos, davar sheba minyan, bottom line is it's chashuv. That's the bottom line. Bottom line is it is chashuv, and therefore halacha l'maisa is not batel. So also now watch this. So the Gemara says this is great. V'nimshach v'nikrav chad binayo v'neima kol de parish miruba parish. Wow. So also listen to this. I have a great idea. Why? So I understand that really I can't go ahead and look at the group as a whole, right? Because we'll say let's just go back to Mishnah, whatever case you want to say, right? The chatos shemei, right? I have a chatos animal and the owner died that gets mixed in with other chatos animals. Now the Mishnah says I'm stuck, right? Because an animal is chashuv, and therefore Allah l'maisa, again, I can't do anything with the group. So I have a great idea. Let me go over to the group. Let me go over to the chevra of animals, and instead of dealing with them as a group, take them out one at a time. Now let's say I go over to the group. I take out animal 1. There's a concept about saying halacha of kol de parish meruba parish. When something separates from the whole, we could assume that it separates from the majority. Now, what's the majority of this animal chevra? Majority animal chevra? Right, majority? Permitted animals. Maybe the chatas case is not the best example, but in any case of the Mishnah you want. Go ahead and just take one out, and you could assume that the item separate out from the majority. So we'll see, hear what the Gemara is saying? You're going to run into a problem when you look at the group as a group. Why? Why am I going to run into a problem? Because the prohibited animal is not batel in the group. So the Gemara says something great. Don't look at it as a group. Instead, what should you do? Start pulling out one animal at a time. And when you pull out one animal at a time, again, they both say, when you go out to the animal chevra, you pull out one animal. What is the statistical probability? That it's mutter. Why? because the majority of animals are mutter. And we have a concept like that in halacha. We're going to see in just a moment. Called the parish, meruba parish. I'll give you the simple example of this. You go ahead and you have I'm skipping out on the Gemara just for a second. You're walking on the street. You find a piece of meat in the street. Again, times have changed a little bit, but right? You find a piece of meat in the street, right? In your particular locale, there are 9 butcher shops, 1 non-kosher butcher shop. What's the status of the meat? What's the status of the meat? Mutter. Mutter. Why? Because I assume that meat came from a kosher butcher shop. So the Gemara says, this is great. Why don't we just solve a problem like this? Just take 1 animal at a time. And every animal, ultimately, again, you take out, ultimately what? Ultimately what? You can assume that's kosher. Which I will say, by the way, there's a tremendous metaphor in this also. Tremendous metaphor. The whole problem that we're running into is because we're looking at this problem in a herd, right, as a group. Instead, the Gemara is saying is just take them out 1 animal at a time. I think it's a tremendous metaphor for the following. Sometimes in life, a person has a lot going on. Or maybe all the time in life, a person has a lot going on, right? I've got a herd of problems. So both say, so what happens when you try to go ahead and deal with your herd of problems? What happens? It's way too overwhelming. And generally, most of us, when we get overwhelmed in life, what do we do? Absolutely nothing. We shut down and we freeze. So sometimes the avodah in life is don't attack a herd of problems, but instead, what should you do? 1 animal problem at a time. Just take out 1 thing from the herd at a time. Don't try to tackle everything because it's not going to work, right? You're just going to get overwhelmed, and chances are you'll do absolutely nothing. But if you address your herd of problems 1 animal at a time, then you can deal with it. Now, for most of us, it's so uncomfortable because when I'm only attacking 1 animal at a time, 1 problem at a time, I know that there's all these other problems that remain unsolved. Yeah, part of life is learning to accept the fact that you're going to be living in a state of disrepair for a while longer. But it's okay. As long as you're attacking 1 animal at a time, you're making good movement in life. Some people could address the herd as a whole. Most of us can't. We just get overwhelmed. Just deal with it. 1 animal problem at a time. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Nimshach, what do you mean pull it out? If you pull out 1 animal at a time, so the Gemara says, Kavua. The Rambam says that's issue of kavua, which let's finish just a moment. On the base, the chol kavua kimechza al mechza dami. So let me explain this outside. So remember, the classic example the Gemara gives about this is the butcher shop, is the piece of meat. So remember again, going back to our example before. If halacha l'maisa, I'm walking and I find a piece of meat on the ground, right? So again, what's the status of the meat? Let's assume for a moment in my locale, 9 kosher butcher shops, 1 non-kosher one. So what's the status of the meat? What's the status of the meat? Kosher, right? Let's say I went into a store. I walk out with a package of meat. And I'm like, I don't remember which store I went into. What's the halacha? The meat is asr. Now, why the distinction? There's a distinction when the meat came out of its original location versus when I'm going into a primary location. When the meat comes out of its location, then ultimately, again, we apply the concept of called the parish, meruba parish. Whatever has separated from the majority. When you're going into a location, that's called kol kavua. You're going into a fixed location. Whenever you go into a fixed location, you cannot rely on rov. So what the Gemara is saying is like this. If I'm pulling out an animal from the herd, right? So Gemara wanted to say, I could fix this whole problem. Don't look at the herd, but instead deal with this as an individual animal issue. Pull out 1 animal at a time. Pulling out 1 animal at a time is like finding a piece of meat on the street, which Gemara says, no, it's not. Pulling out 1 animal at a time is like going into a store. Well, when you've gone into a fixed location, you can't rely on rov. Pulling out an animal 1 at a time ultimately is like going into a fixed location, and therefore you can't rely on a rov. To which the Gemara says, fine, I can deal with that also. To Ayin Gimel base 73b, the Gemara says, Ella, listen to this, Nich b'shinu dinaidi v'neba called the parashura parish. Very simple. Scatter the chevra. I don't know how. How do you scatter a herd of animals? I don't know. Get up and say, in this week's parasha it says, right? And then everyone goes running in different directions, right? So Lamaisa, again, whatever you need to do, right? Scatter the chevra, and that way again, if you scatter them and then you chap them 1 animal at a time, then they've separated, right? Once they've dispersed, they're no longer kavua, they're no longer fixed in location. And when you take them one at a time, then that's like finding a piece of meat on the street. And you could say, kol de parish miruba parish. Whatever has separated, ultimately, again, has separated from the majority. It's a great chap. Amar Rava, so I said, here's the problem. This is fascinating. Gzeira Shemeyavo, listen to this. Shemeyavo Yud Kohanim bevasachas v'yikruvo. This is so interesting. So the Gemara says, so what's the issue? Okay, so let's say we do this. So let's say, for argument's sake, there's 10 animals, right? 10 animals. That doesn't really matter what the number is. So we'll say, so now remember again, the case in the Mishnah is where you have a prohibited karban gets mixed in with with permitted karbanos, right? That's what's happening over here. So now the Gemara is saying, okay, I have a great eitzah. What's the eitzah? Scatter the animals, chap whatever you need, right? And that way, again, everything is permitted. What are we concerned about? We're concerned about is, let's say everybody does this eitzah. They bring the karban to the Beis HaMikdash. The concern is that maybe you're going to have 10 kohanim offering up these 10 animals simultaneously. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is, let's say there's 10 animals in the group, right? And now the kohanim are offering this up simultaneously. What do I know? In my heart, what do I know? One of those animals is prohibited. I know that. So because of the concern that maybe everybody is going to attempt this idea, and it could be that all of these animals will be brought to the Beis HaMikdash simultaneously, offered up simultaneously, right? The zrika will be done simultaneously, and I know that one of them is aser. Chazal weren't comfortable with this. Look at Rashi just a moment. Amar Rava Gezerah Shemi Yavo Yud Kohanim bevasachas v'yikravu chasara da'itcha hashta dechayish l'shema achar sheyikchem echad ad sheshachtu yud v'heim rov yavo Yud Kohanim v'yizriku demeim v'yaktira emurein ke'echad. So that's my concern, which is quite an interesting concern. But that's my concern, that Allah Maisa, 10 people will do the same thing. They're going to bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. Everything's going to be done simultaneously, and the Kohanim are going to end up doing zrika at the same time. And I know that one of those animals potentially is prohibited. So that's the concern. The Gemara says, 1 second, hold up. First of all, 1 second. What is a second? So now you're going to tell me, if we're talking about the concern of doing zrika at the same time, that means they've already been shechted. Right? That means there's already been Kabbalah. So is it possible to say that animals that were shechted and did Kabbalah, beheter, right, in a permissible way, potentially could then subsequently become aser? Right? In other words, the logic doesn't make sense. So what we're suggesting is, once the process, in other words, once you've utilized the mechanism of kol de parish meruba parish, so then really what we have to say is what? The mixture has kind of been disbanded, right? The group, right? The band has been disbanded, right? In other words, they're no longer a chevra. If they're no longer a chevra, what are you going to say? That maybe because all 10 people are going to come at the same time, go ahead and do zrika at the same time, now it's going to become aser again? That doesn't make any sense. Ella, the Gemara says, Ella me'ata megis asira. Rather, the Gemara says, you're right. Mishum shema yavo yud kohanim b'bas achas v'yikchu. So the Gemara says, no. What we're concerned about is if 10 Kohanim go ahead and do this at the same time. Rashi says over here, "Omishani mishum shami yavo yud Kohanim b'basachas v'yikru mitocha tarobes v'chevan deruba nichse ki adadi ikal mechashti isura beruba isa." No, what we're concerned about is, I will say, if all right, everybody obviously is learning the same Gemara, right? All of Klal Yisrael is on the same daf of Maseches Zevachim. What's going to happen if, okay, so you have this great idea to go out and remedy the prohibited group, but let's say a whole bunch of other people have this same idea also, and everybody comes at the same time. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look right when the group is being disbanded and everybody's using this mechanism, when I know full well that what? Someone's walking around with the prohibited animal. Right? In other words, at the end of the day, somebody is walking away with the animal that is, which means their prohibited animal is still going to be utilized. We're uncomfortable with that. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. But 1 second. Is it possible for 10 Kohanim to chap an animal simultaneously? In other words, here's what's interesting. When you're worried about zrika, could you have simultaneity in zrika? Yeah, that absolutely could happen. They both say, now here's what's interesting. If you're talking about disbanding the group and going ahead and chasing after the animal, they both say, have you ever chased after an animal? Have you ever chased after a sheep? Right? No, right? Everyone's off from work tomorrow. It might be, I don't know, it might be a nice activity with the family, right? Or I guess the turkey's more, right? But Lemaisa, again, so what are the chances of simultaneity when running after a group, right? That doesn't sound like you could actually establish simultaneity over there. So we'll say, so remember again, the whole issue is only where there's simultaneity. Because remember again, where there's no simultaneity, we're fine, right? The issue is 10 people doing the same thing at the same time. It's hard to turn a blind eye to the fact that someone is walking away with a prohibited animal. But if there's not simultaneity, we're totally okay. So if we're talking about 10 Kohanim showing up and disbanding the group at the same time, they're going to have to chase the animals. There's no simultaneity in acquisition in that case. Rather, the Rava says, Mishum Kavua. Rather, Rabbi said, at the end of the day, the reason we don't like this approach is because ultimately, again, of Kavua. That's really what we're concerned about. Rashi says, Mishum Kavua. It's the last short line in Rashi. Elamar Mishum Kavua. Dilma Asil Mimshach. The Gemara says, Ulamisabinu Chad Kilo Naidi. The real concern over here, ultimately, again, is not about when you actually disperse the group. The real issue over here is actually, again, if we're concerned, you won't disperse the group. That's actually what we're concerned about over here. That halacha l'maisa, you won't end up properly dispersing the group, and you'll end up actually taking it from a fixed group, which is truly halachically problematic. Because it will say it makes sense. In other words, the Gemara is being moda. Let's say I would agree that there is a mechanism to go ahead, disperse the group. Whatever comes therefore from the group is called the parish miruba parish. That would work. But Lamaisa, we're concerned that you'll take the animal without dispersing the group. And if you do that, it's kavua. And if it's kavua, you're really halachically in problematic area. Amar Rava. Rava says as follows. Hashti da amri rabbanon lo nakriv, I nakriv lo merzi. So both saying that this is incredible. Now Rava will at least begin this today. Rava says it's a really exciting Gemara. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, it turns out that really, we're right back to the Mishnah, which is when you have the prohibited item mixed in ultimately again with the group, so what happens? The group remains prohibited. Now, even though again, for a variety of different reasons, davar sheba minyan, eshadar kalim, kosher kalim, it's baruch Hashem, it's chashuv, it's important, and therefore it's not batal. Now, the Gemara just suggested an idea as how you could go ahead and ultimately utilize the animals. How would you do that? Essentially, disperse the group. And if you disperse the group, you could say, call the parish miruba parish. The Gemara says, I don't like it at the end. I'm not going to let you do it. Why? Because at the end of the day, I'm concerned you're going to end up coming to take from the animals without dispersing the group. And if you take it without dispersing the group, then you're taking it from a fixed location. And whenever you take it from a fixed location, Allah Lamaisa, what's the issue? You take it from a fixed location, ultimately, again, it's aser. It's aser. Good. So now we've dealt with that. So Rabbi says, Hashta da amri rabbanan lo nakriv. Now that the rabbanan say you can't go ahead and offer anything from that collective group, if you did so, lo marati, the carbon doesn't work. The carbon doesn't work. So we'll say we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with Rabbi tomorrow. Mir Hashem. Yeah, I should have gotten a little bit further on such a short daf, but okay, it's good. Baruch Hashem. We'll say shkayach tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Is tomorrow a Sunday schedule? Sunday schedule. Okay. All right, I'll send out the schedule later on in Meretz Hashem. Then we'll say shkoyach. Incredible. Have a great day. Everyone on Zoom. Have a great day, everyone.
This is such a great week. We know the food. We got 9 pieces of